Yeah, definitely. Like if I forget to define something or assume something, yeah, then stop me and ask me a question. Okay, I guess should we get started? So I'm going to put up the. Oops, I have to share the screen. Uh,
You're good now.
Okay, got it. All right. Okay, so there's the screen. Um, so what I promised today was to do the reason I wanted to end with Maimonides on this class was because he is going to discuss all those questions about reward and punishment and the afterlife, the heaven and hell, the resurrection of the dead, the Messiah, all those issues he discusses in this essay, which was his introduction to the 13 principles of faith that are well known in Orthodox circles and became a popular song that is sometimes sung at the end of services on Saturday morning called Yigdal. Yigdal was, I forgot who wrote it, but it was written, and it's at the end of this text, the handout, was written as a sort of a musical version of Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, a poetic musical version. But here we're going to read the introduction to his 13 principles, where he really lays out his beliefs. So let me just say a little about Maimonides first. I might have talked about him before. He was a Jewish physician who lived in the 12th century, was born at the end of the Golden Age of Spain, when Spain was ruled by moderate, advanced, enlightened Muslims. And there was sort of a convivencia, a sort of a relatively amicable intermixing of Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Spain at the time, because the Muslims there were pretty enlightened. They had translated Greek philosophy into Arabic and studied Greek philosophy and science. They were advanced in poetry, arts, music, medicine, etc. This is at the same time that the rest of Europe was in the Dark Ages. So Maimonides grew up in this time, and so therefore he learned Greek philosophy at an early age, and you'll see that he is at least somewhat influenced by Greek philosophy, particularly Aristotle. That came to an end when a radical Muslim group invaded from Morocco, crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and into Spain, made life unpleasant for everybody, including the moderate Muslims. Maimonides' family fled. They went to Morocco first, and then across the North Africa continent into Israel briefly, but there it was being ruled by the Crusaders. The Christian Crusaders held Israel at the time. That was not pleasant for Jews, so they ended up settling back in Egypt. In Egypt, Maimonides' brother died. His brother was in international trade and was helping to support the family, but his brother died on one of his international trips. Maimonides was inconsolable for years afterwards, and he also studied to become a physician and became the physician for Salah ad-Din, who was the ruler of Egypt at the time. Salah ad-Din in English is Saladin, and he is known in the Western world as the one who reconquered Israel from the Christians and reclaimed it for Muslims. So Maimonides was his personal physician and the physician for his entire court in Cairo. And then Maimonides went back to the Jewish community in the suburb of Cairo and would treat the sick people there. And then he would write that late at night, he would write his Jewish writings. He wrote 3 major Jewish works. The first one is the one we're going to be looking at a little snippet from, his commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah is that kernel of the Talmud that was completed around 200 of the Common Era and sort of laid out the rabbinic model for what Judaism should be after the destruction of the temple. They kind of outlined how to celebrate the festivals, how to keep kosher, how to celebrate the Sabbath, and all the other aspects of Jewish life and belief. So that was sort of fixed by around the year 200. That text was studied and commented upon by the academies in Israel and in Babylonia for another few centuries. And each community, the one in Israel and the one in Babylonia, each came up with their own commentary on the Mishnah, which is why we have two Talmuds. Those commentaries were edited together into the Talmud. One Talmud developed by the schools in Israel called the Jerusalem Talmud, and one Talmud edited in Babylonia called the Babylonian Talmud, oddly enough. But Maimonides didn't write his commentary on the Talmud, which is what most scholars did. After the Talmud was finished, most scholars figured, well, let's just do a commentary on the last rabbinic work, the Talmud. Maimonides went back to the Mishnah to write his commentary on that. He did that at a fairly young age. I don't remember now, I didn't look it up before the class this morning, but at a young age, he wrote his commentary on the Mishnah. And then he wrote his magnum opus, the Code of Jewish Law, which he called the Mishneh Torah, where he really systematized Jewish law in a brilliant way, completely original, in 14 books, divided into different categories of laws, each law divided into chapters, each chapter divided into specific rules, and an easy to read Mishnaic Hebrew, an archaic form of Hebrew. It's just a brilliant work. And then finally, he wrote his Guide for the Perplexed, which was his work for people, enlightened Jews who had studied Greek philosophy and science and were having trouble reconciling science and religion, an issue that continues to this day. So he wrote his Guide for the Perplexed to help explain how Judaism could fit with modern science. I think I've said before in this class, I don't recommend reading the Guide for the Perplexed. He intentionally made it difficult to understand because he did not want to upset the common Jew who had not studied science and had a sort of more rudimentary, sort of antiquated sort of view of Judaism. He wanted to write for the enlightened Jew. So there are some books out now that help you to understand what Maimonides' thinking was. Two books out now. One is written by Micah Goodman, Micah Goodman. You can get it from Amazon. It was originally written in Hebrew. He translated it into English. I think it's Maimonides and the Book That Changed the World, or Changed Judaism, something like that. You can check it out on Amazon. And the other one is by Kenneth Seeskin, Seeskin, Kenneth Seeskin. And somebody wants to put these in the chat room. That's the chat box. That would be good. That's also available from Amazon. It's called Guide for Today's Perplexed or something like that. Okay, so in any case, he wrote that toward the end of his life. The text we're going to study now is at the beginning of his life. And here he really lays out, for someone who's paying attention, his pretty advanced ideas about these concepts, heaven and hell, the afterlife, and so on. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. Remember, it's a commentary on the Mishnah. On a few occasions, Maimonides would go off on a tangent and write a whole essay, a very lengthy essay, on a particular point in his commentary, and that's what this is. It's a long essay on one verse of the Mishnah. The Mishnah comes from, I'm just going to tell you where it's from. Here is, I'm pointing to it with my cursor here. The Mishnah is from the Tractate of Sanhedrin, which talks about rules of the Supreme Court in Judaism. The Sanhedrin was sort of the Supreme Court and Congress. And they handled, among other things, capital cases. So there's a chapter that deals with capital offenses, what the rules of capital punishment, how people should be put to death and under what circumstances. At the end of that chapter is this section of the Mishnah that then talks about what happens after you die. Okay, so I'm going to try and read only the underlined parts mostly because I've kind of, as you can see, annotated this to highlight what I want to talk about. Okay, so all Jews have a share in the world to come, says the Mishnah, whatever that means. In Hebrew, that's olam haba, usually understood as the spiritual afterlife. After you die, your soul goes to this olam haba. So according to the Mishnah, all Jews have a share in this olam haba. However, they then take that back. Maybe not all Jews. These have no share in the world to come. One who says that resurrection of the dead, techiyat hametim in Hebrew, is not taught in the Torah. Not only do you have to believe in resurrection of the dead, but you have to believe that it's found in the 5 books of Moses. And as I've said before, I've read the Torah a few times now. It's not there. So I'm not going to get olam haba because I don't believe resurrection of the dead is in the Torah. I don't even believe in resurrection of the dead. It's okay if you do, by the way. That was a traditional Jewish belief, as we'll see. But I just have a hard time understanding how that would work. So I guess I'm not getting olam haba according to the Mishnah. Number 2, those Jews who say that the Torah is not from heaven, that is, that God didn't write it. So if you believe that means God dictated word for word the 5 books of Moses, the way we have it today, then again, I'm not going to go to heaven. I don't get the afterlife because, as an earlier class session, I don't believe that's how the Torah was written. I do believe it was all divinely inspired. And so if you interpret believing that the Torah is from heaven as being divinely inspired, then I guess I'm okay. And finally, what's translated here as the atheist. The Hebrew word is apikoros, which already gives you a hint that this is influenced by Greek philosophy, because there was a Greek philosopher named Epicurus. And he taught a school of thought that resulted in the modern English word Epicurean. So Epicurean is supposed to be the ultimate delight, the superb, the highest quality of food or whatever is in Epicureans. That's because in sort of an unfair summary of Epicurus's belief, this is all there is to life. Afterwards, there is no life. And so therefore, you might as well enjoy life to the maximum while you're here. And that's, so Epicurus believes that there's no life after death, among other things. Well, if you don't believe there's life after death, you won't get life after death, according to the Mishnah. It looks like we have some chats in the chat room, so let me take a look at the chat room. Yeah, so right. So yes, it was a originally, if the Christians got it was in the chat room, it says that Christians, it was a Christian belief, and yes, it was very popular to believe in resurrection of the dead at the time of Jesus' life and death and his followers. And no doubt the Christians believed in resurrection of the dead because it was commonly held Jewish belief at the time. Although not all Jews believed it at the time, according to Josephus, the Pharisees believed in life after death and resurrection of the dead. The Sadducees did not. The Sadducees was the party of the priests. Okay, so that's the Mishnah that Maimonides is going to comment on. And now he's going to give a lengthy survey. So I must speak now, he says, of the great fundamental principles of our faith. Know that the masters of Torah hold differing opinions concerning the good which will come to a person as a result of fulfilling the commandments, which God commanded us through Moses, our teacher. Okay, so I just want to point out a few things that in his opening line here. He mentions that there are differing opinions, and I think that is 100% correct. There are differing opinions, and they don't always fit together. And Maimonides is going to kind of deal with that. The other thing is, he's already saying, is the Torah from heaven? Well, it was commanded through Moses. Now, I believe that Maimonides believed that God did pretty much dictate the Torah to Moses. But this does give a window of opportunity for us, those of us who don't believe that he commanded it through Moses and other human beings. As a consequence of their different understandings of the problem, that's going back to these differing opinions, they also hold widely different opinions concerning the evil which transgressors suffer. So much confusion has invaded their opinions that it's almost impossible to find someone whose opinion is uncontaminated by error. I just want to add here, for those who haven't studied Maimonides before, he is brilliant, and he also knows he's brilliant, and he doesn't have patience for people who are not as smart as him. So he's a little bit pungent in his comments here. Okay, so widely differing opinions concerning the evil, right? So one group, so now he's going to spell out the different groups of Jews. They're all Jews. One group of Jews thinks that the good, by the way, he's not talking about this as a reward, and I think that's intentional here, as we'll say later in the essay. He just talks about the good thing that will happen, is the Garden of Eden, because that is what heaven is called in Hebrew, Gan Eden, right? The heaven is called Gan Eden in Jewish thought. And so here he says the expected good is Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, which is a place where one eats and drinks without any physical work or effort. Houses are made of precious stones, beds of silk, rivers flow with wine and fragrant oils, and many other things of that sort. This group believes that the evil, Gehenna, that's the word for hell in Hebrew, Gehinom, as I mentioned last week. So they believe that the evil thing that happens to you if you were bad is Gehenna, a place of raging fire in which bodies are burned and agonies of all sorts are inflicted upon men. And as I said last week, Jews, particularly in Maimonides' time, absolutely believed in a fiery hell. Many, I would say probably most Jews at that time believed in a fiery hell punishment for people, and I know it surprises a lot of modern Jews because not very many modern Jews believe in that, but Jews did at Maimonides' day. Number two, so the second group asserts that the good thing that will happen if you're a good boy or girl is the days of the Messiah, Yamot HaMashiach, in which time all men will be angels and all of them will live forever. This is a supernatural messianic vision, right? It's not like the laws of nature that we know today. People will live forever. We'll all be angelic. We will be giants in stature. We will grow in numbers and strength until we have occupied the entire world forever. Well, we kind of did that already, much more than he could have imagined back then. They didn't even know about the New World yet. The Messiah will live forever. The earth will bring forth garments woven, bread baked, and many other impossible things. Right? You won't have to work for a living anymore. There's going to be an ever-stocked Walmarts that you just walk into the store, take what you want, and that's it. You don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to work. It's going to be forever stocked with items that you can just take as you wish. The evil, the bad thing that'll happen for bad people is that you won't live to be alive in those days and you won't merit the privilege of seeing them. A third group holds that the good for which we hope is the resurrection of the dead. By this they mean that a man will live after his death and return to his family and dear ones to eat and drink and never die again. According to this opinion, the evil is that a person will not live after his death among those who are resurrected. Right? So resurrection of the dead. Again, this was pretty universally held belief in Judaism at the time, based on the Mishnah, which said you have to believe it. A fourth view is that the goal of fulfilling the commandments is the achievement of bodily peace and mundane success, not supernatural. This is a very natural, fitting with the laws of physics kind of success. Fertile lands, extensive possessions, many children, health, peace, and security. This is all possible within the laws of nature. There's nothing that's supernatural about this. There will be a Jewish king who will rule over those who oppressed us. I don't know about that, but at least will rule over us. The evil, the bad thing that'll happen is the opposite of these as our present exile, right? Right now we're ruled by everybody. The Muslims in some parts of the world, Christians in other parts of the world. We have no independent country, and we're living kind of miserable, marginal lives. I call this Messiah version 2 because it's a natural vision of what the Messianic era would look like, and this is the supernatural vision of what the Messianic era would look like. And finally, he says a fifth group, and the largest one, combines the opinions of all the others. They assert that the ultimate hope is the Messiah will come, he'll resurrect the dead, we'll all enter the Garden of Eden, and we'll eat and drink in perfect health forever, right? Kind of a mishmash of all of the above. However, concerning this strange world to come, you will rarely find anyone to whom it occurs to think about it seriously, or to adopt it as a fundamental doctrine of our faith, or to inquire what it really means. A lot of Jews have never really examined what this is all about. This is, again, fitting with what I've said before. The Jewish religion is really largely based on how to live in this world, and that's why we never really spent much time thinking about the afterlife. Yeah, there's an afterlife, but we don't really know what it is, and it'll all work itself out. Let's focus on this world. That has been the Jewish tradition, and that's kind of what he's saying over here. Then he says, what everybody wants to know is, how will the dead rise? Whether they will be naked or clothed? I mean, who wants to be resurrected naked and then be embarrassed when everybody else is also being resurrected naked? That would be embarrassing. So let's hope that we're all resurrected with clothes on our bodies. Whether they will rise in the same shrouds we're buried in. So then, you know, if we're going to have clothes, what clothes are we wearing? The plain white shroud that we were buried in? That's kind of gross. Probably disintegrated. How would that work? Besides, I'd like to wear nice clothes. I'd like to wear a suit and tie. With the same embroidery style, the beauty of sewing, or in a plain garment which just covers the bodies. Or they ask whether, when the Messiah comes, will we still be rich and poor, will be strong and weak, and so many other questions. Now, these questions he considers kind of stupid, right? He's kind of saying these are the stupid questions that people ask, and he implies that there's more serious questions, but he doesn't actually spell out what the serious objections to this afterlife might be. Let me spoiler alert here. Think about this question. If you were married and then divorced and remarried, or married and your spouse dies and you remarry, and now everybody's resurrected, who are you married to? And how is that an ideal world? Secondly, if you are going to be resurrected, what age do you get resurrected at? There's only two logical ages. One is at birth, you get resurrected as an infant to start all over again, or at death, you get resurrected as a 112-year-old person. Not too many people want to get resurrected at 112. And on the other hand, if you get resurrected as an infant, there's billions of infants in the world. Who's changing their diapers and feeding them? And if you want to pick some arbitrary age in the middle, who selects that arbitrary age? Those are big questions about resurrection, but let's go on. He's now talking to thoughtful readers, right? You, however, who read this book thoughtfully, must understand the analogy I'm about to draw. So this is what I say, analogy number 1. Imagine a small child who has been brought to his teacher so that he may be taught the Torah, which is ultimate good because it will bring him to perfection, right? Wisdom, this is a common Greek idea and now also a very common Jewish idea, specifically Torah wisdom for us. The more you learn about wisdom, the more self-fulfilled you become as a human being, right? That's the ultimate good. And that's the ultimate purpose of existence. But because he's only a child and because his understanding is deficient, he does not grasp the true value of that good, nor does he understand the perfection which can be achieved by it. Therefore, his teacher must bribe him to study. I always tell teachers this, right? Bribes are not bad, by means of which the child loves in a childish way. In other words, read and I will give you some figs or nuts. That was a delicacy back then, right? So if you study this, I will give you a reward. I'll give you some honey. Chocolate had not been discovered, so he couldn't say, I'll give you a Hershey's chocolate bar, but that might be something we would say today. He does not work hard for the sake of reading itself. because he doesn't understand the value of that. He reads in order to obtain the food. He thinks of study as work and effort, but he's willing to do it in order to get what he wants, the piece of candy. As the child grows and his mind improves, candy's not going to do it anymore. Now he understands there's more important things in the world. So now you have to say, read, and I'll give you some shoes or nice clothes, right? I'll bribe you with something really nifty that you will enjoy. So that works for a while, and then that doesn't work. So now you're going to, I want something more. So learn this passage in this chapter, and I'll give you a dinar or two. Kind of like a parent who would tell their children, I'll give you $5 for every A on your report card, right? They're going to get the A's for the money. The end which he seeks to achieve through his study is to acquire the money. Eventually you get older and you realize that's not enough. You desire something a little more honorable. So now you can say study, and you'll become president of a court or a judge, and people give you honor and respect, just as they do so-and-so. And here he's shifted, and I just want to note, he's shifted from something tangible to an intangible reward, right? And this means that the person is a little more sophisticated because they don't need something that they can get their hands on, literally. They're doing it for something that's not physical, a spiritual or emotional kind of reward, right? Something that's not tangible. And that's a higher level of development, according to Maimonides. However, double underline, this is deplorable. However, it's also unavoidable because of man's limited insight, as a result of which he makes the goal of wisdom something other than wisdom itself, and assumes that the purpose of study is the acquisition of honor, which makes a mockery of truth. Our sages call this learning not for its own sake. It's disgusting that we have to bribe people at all in order to study. But unfortunately, human nature is such that some people won't do it unless you bribe them. So he quotes the Pirkei Avot, don't make the Torah a crown for self-glorification or a spade with which to dig. You shouldn't use the Torah as an implement for your own gain. It should be just to make yourself more enlightened. One ought not to busy oneself with God's Torah in order to earn one's living, like rabbis do. Nor should the end of studying wisdom be anything but knowing it. The truth is no other purpose than knowing it's the truth. A good man must not wonder, if I perform these commandments, what will I get out of it? What's in it for me? But you have to answer the fool according to his folly. So you say, look, I'll give you some money or some clothes or some candy and whatever. Okay. And in Pirkei Avot it says, don't be like the servants who serve the master for the sake of receiving a reward. Don't expect a reward. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But be like the servants who serve the master not without expecting a reward. Right? Our parents often say, why should you do this? Because it's the right thing to do. Not because I'm going to give you a bribe, but you should do it because it's the right thing to do. And should you be tempted to say, I'll study Torah in order to become rich, or in order to be called Rabbi, he's talking to me, or in order to receive a reward in the world to come, Scripture says, love the Lord your God. Whatever you do, do it only out of love. This is like the center of his entire essay. We should be good because we love God. If you love your Creator, everything else follows from that. Only a disturbed fool whose mind is deranged by folly and by fantasy will refuse to recognize this truth. Like I said, he's a little pungent in his writing. Our sages knew that it's a very difficult goal to achieve, and not every person can achieve this. Men do not do anything except to achieve profit or to avoid loss. Now, here comes the astonishing part of the essay. Therefore, in order that the masses stay faithful and do the commandments, it was permitted to tell them that they might have a reward and to warn them against transgressions out of a fear of punishment. Any questions about that so far? Okay, so he's basically saying there is no such thing as reward and punishment. We only tell people there is so that they'll behave. That's pretty astonishing. No heaven, no hell, maybe no resurrection of the dead. I mean, he seems to be saying none of this is true. We only tell people that because they don't understand that being good is itself a value. He'll take a little of that back later, but I just want to point this out. Okay, the masses, after all, lose nothing when they follow the commandments out of fear of punishment and out of hope for reward, since they're not perfect. And out of this effort, they may be awakened to the knowledge of the truth and serve God out of love, which is the point of the whole thing. You must know. Okay, now he's going to do a second digression here. Second point he wants to make. You must know that the words of the sages are differently interpreted by three groups of people. Now he's going to try and explain why the rabbis talked about heaven and hell and the afterlife and all that other stuff. And so he's going to say you have to understand the language the rabbis used when they described things. And there's three ways to understand it. The first group, the largest one, accepts the teaching of the sages in their simple, literal sense. If they said there's going to be resurrection of the dead, there's going to be resurrection of the dead. Full stop. They do not think that these teachings contain any hidden meaning at all. They believe all sorts of impossible things. They hold these opinions because they have not understood science, right? This is again about the conflict between rational science and some religious beliefs. They believe that the sages intended no more than they themselves understand with their inadequate knowledge, in spite of the fact that some of their teachings, when taken literally, seem so fantastic and irrational that if one were to repeat them literally, even to the uneducated, let alone a sophisticated scholar, their amazement would prompt them to ask how anyone in the world could believe such things to be true. Okay. Yes, the Shema does talk about reward and punishment. I'm just looking at the chat comment here. Does Maimonides only refer to the Mishnah? No, actually, his Guide for the Perplexed, he goes through many passages of the Bible and explains metaphorical meanings of passages that don't make scientific sense. Yes, the second paragraph of the Shema absolutely talks about a physical reward and punishment in this world, and that is one of the problems to overcome, right? I did just address that a little bit in the earlier class on why bad things happen to good people. So you can go back and watch that video. Okay, so members of this group are poor in knowledge. One can only regret their folly. Right? People who take the rabbis literally, we can only regret their folly. Their very effort to honor and exalt the sages actually humiliates them, because everybody else would say, who would believe such nonsense? As God lives, this group destroys the glory of the Torah and extinguishes its light. Again, he doesn't pull his punches here. But God told us when he gave us the Torah, surely this great nation is as wise and understanding people, because the Torah, because the Torah is so brilliant, everybody would look at us and say, wow, this is a brilliant people. Look at their brilliant Torah. And yet now you're saying things that make no sense at all, and that humiliates the Torah, right? But so when other peoples hear them, they will say, this is a little people. It's foolish and ignoble, because look at the crazy things they believe. Would that they keep silent about what they do not know. That's what he says to those group. The second group is a numerous one. It too consists of people who, having read or heard the words of the sages, understand them according to their simple literal sense, and believe the sages intended nothing else than what they learned from their literal interpretation. And they ultimately declare the sages to be fools and hold them up to contempt. Why, those guys were stupid. They say such ridiculous things that makes no scientific sense at all. The sages must have been ignorant fools, right? The sages were simpletons who suffered from inferior intelligence. Now this is what Maimonides has to say about this group. The members of this group are so pretentiously stupid that they can never attain genuine wisdom. They regard themselves as cultivated people, scientists, critics, and philosophers, and they are more stupid than the first group. They are just simply fools. This is an accursed group, right? So He says, if you take the sages literally and then say, but this isn't scientific, so the sages were fools, then you're bigger fools than the first group. Okay, so there's only one other possibility, a third group, and its members are so few in number that it's hardly fit to call them a group, except in the sense in which one speaks of the sun as a group, of which it is the only member. This is kind of Maimonides saying, I'm the only one who is in this group. I'm the only one smart enough to understand what the sages really meant. Again, he kind of knew he was smart, but anyway, whatever. Okay. You have to take his arrogance with a little bit of a grain of salt anyway. I mean, he was very smart. Okay, so it's a very small group of people who understand the way he's going to explain it now. So they know the sages did not speak nonsense, and it is clear to them that the words of the sages contain both an obvious and a hidden meaning. Whenever the sages spoke of things that seem impossible, they were employing the style of riddle and parable, which is the method of truly great thinkers, right? Socrates and all the other Greek philosophers did the same, and that was a common way of expressing deep, profound truths, was to give parables or riddles or paradigms or metaphors for what you're trying to say. All students of rhetoric know the real concern of a riddle is with its hidden meaning and not with its obvious meaning. So, since the words of the sages all deal with supernatural matters, which are the ultimate and must be expressed in riddles and analogies, right? This is, again, goes back to the story of the blind people and the elephant, right? We're all blind when we're trying to describe God. We all grasp a different element of God at different times in our lives. But then how do we express in words this this encounter we had that was not using one of our 5 physical senses, and so therefore is hard to describe in language that we normally use to describe things that exist in the natural universe. God doesn't exist in the natural universe. So you must express things about God and these kinds of ideas in riddles and analogies. It is often difficult for us to interpret words and to reduce their true meaning from the form in which they're contained, so that their real inner meaning conforms to reason and corresponds with truth. The whole book of Job was considered by many of the sages as a metaphoric story, not a real story, just a story to teach a particular lesson. The dead bones of Ezekiel were also considered in metaphoric terms, as we described in a prior class. Now, if you, reader, belong to either of the first 2 groups, you either think that the sages were meant to be taken literally and you believe it, or the sages were meant to be taken literally and you think the sages were stupid. If you're in either of those 2 groups, pay no attention to my words nor anything else in this section. Close the book now. Just stop reading, because what I'm going to write is going to irritate you and you will hate it. So stop reading now if you're in either of the first 2 groups. Right. But if you are among the third group, when you encounter a word of the sages that seems to conflict with reason, you'll realize this utterance must be a riddle and a parable. And if you consider my book in this spirit, with the help of God, it may be useful to you. Now he writes, now I'm going to begin to discuss the matter which I'm really concerned. But I write over here in the margin, not really. Now he's going to give you a second analogy, or another digression. Okay? He's not really getting to the crux of the matter yet. Just as blind people cannot imagine color, right? How would you describe red, the color red, to somebody who is blind from birth? And a deaf person cannot experience sounds. They can hear the sort of thumping of the bass or the drums or something like that, but they can't really experience a symphony the way we do. A eunuch cannot feel sexual desire. I usually take that part out when I'm teaching this to high school kids. So bodies cannot attain spiritual delights. Like fish who do not know the element of fire, remember that in Maimonides' world there were 4 elements: water and fire, air, and earth. And water and fire were opposites. Fire can't exist in water, and where there's water, there's fire, So a fish can't understand fire because fire doesn't exist in water. How would you explain fire to a fish? They live in its opposite, the element of water. And so are the delights of the spiritual world unknown in this material world. In the same way, it's hard for us as physical creatures to understand what the spiritual delight of the afterlife is going to be. How would you describe that to people? How would you understand it? You have to really, really meditate on what a spiritual life might be to try and get a hint of what that's like. And then how would you describe it in words? We enjoy only bodily pleasures which come to us through our physical senses. We neither recognize nor grasp these spiritual things. They come to us only after great searching, right? Meditation. It can hardly be otherwise since we live in the material world. Spiritual delights are eternal and they last forever. Nothing in this world, no physical object lasts forever. That's kind of part of nature. But spiritual things can last forever. Angels experience no. It is therefore inappropriate for us, who are masters of Torah, to say that angels, stars, they believe that stars were kind of like angels, experience no delight. On the contrary, they experience great delight in that they know by experience the true being of God the Creator, and with this knowledge they enjoy delight that is both perpetual and uninterrupted. We will be like, now here's the key thing to Maimonides, we will be like them after death. Those men, people, he used masculine because of the time he lived in, those people who choose to purify themselves will reach this spiritual height. They will neither experience bodily pleasures, nor will they want them, right? So all those who talked about the rivers flowing with fragrant spices and eating and gorging ourselves on fancy foods, that's all nice. That's a great way to explain something, a pleasure, to somebody who lives in a physical world. But we're going to live in a spiritual world, and that's going to be incomparably better. And we're not even going to think about food in that world. We're not going to care about food because we're experiencing something even more amazing. Thus, you will find that most men will exert extraordinary amounts of intellectual and physical energy and labor in ordinary tests to acquire honor. Remember, that was the highest level of bribe in his first analogy, right? Because honor is not tangible. But look how much people will do for honor, an intangible reward. And the pleasure which honor brings is not the same pleasure as the kind of eating and drinking. Many others will deny themselves even the keenest of bodily delights because they fear shame and public disgrace, right? But that's not tangible either. If this is the case in this material world, how much more must it be so in the spiritual world, and that is the world to come. In the world to come, our souls will become wise out of the knowledge of God the Creator. We're going to be plugged into the source of all truth and goodness in the universe. And that's going to be just incomparably amazing, and we'll never want anything else. This spiritual delight is not divisible into parts, nor can it be described, nor can any analogy explain it. So, I'm going to skip this part and just go to his conclusion here. The ultimate good, then, what is the good thing that you will attain for being a good person in this world? The final end is to achieve this supernal fellowship, that you are going to have this afterlife, this spiritual afterlife, where you will participate in high glory in which the soul is forever involved with the existence of God the Creator, who is the cause and source of its existence and its goal. This is incomparably good. Now, just want to take a moment, go back to what he said before. Earlier he said there's no such thing as reward and punishment, or he seemed to say that. We only tell people about rewards and punishments so they'll behave. And hopefully, after they behave for a while, they will realize that behaving is a good in itself, right? And they will come to do things because they love God, the Creator, and God's creation, this world and all the creatures that live in it. If you behaved in that, with that in mind, your whole life, you would be living a pious, righteous life, right? And with that connection, your soul will enjoy this ultimate good in the world to come. But he kind of indicated that there's no rewards and punishments before. So let me just deal with that. Um, a reward is an artificial benefit you get for doing something, right? So you get the money because you studied. Your parents give you the $5 bill for the A. There's no natural connection between a $5 bill and you're getting an A. It was artificially connected by your parents. Um, and so what Maimonides is saying is there is no such thing as an artificial reward. What happens is you live a good life, your soul is thereby nurtured and grows to such a powerful sense that nothing can stop it from continuing to exist, not even the death of your body. So when your body ceases to function, your soul is so powerful, it will continue to exist without a body, and it will then become plugged into God, the source of all life and goodness and truth in the universe, right? As a natural consequence of your having nurtured your soul by living a good life in this world. On the other hand, all right, so it's not a reward because it's not artificial. It's a natural consequence of what you did. On the other hand, the utterly evil punishment consists in the cutting off of the soul so that it perishes and does not live eternally. This is the penalty of karet. It's a Hebrew word for being cut off. And many times in the Bible, this word is used to describe a punishment, that you will be cut off. And it's not explained in the Bible what being cut off means. Maimonides says it means that your soul is cut off from eternal existence. Your soul, because you did the opposite of good things, you did bad things in the world, and you didn't try to enlighten yourself by learning and reading and studying and philosophizing, but also living a good life and helping other people and making the planet a better place. All those things, if you didn't do them, you're torturing your soul. Your soul really wants to do them, and you're doing the opposite. You're torturing your soul. And instead of growing in strength and power, your soul shrivels and contracts. And therefore, when your body dies, your soul is so crippled, basically, it can't exist when your body stops functioning. And you are cut off, literally, from God forever. Now, some people might not think that's a punishment. All right, that's all there is to this world. But Maimonides thinks it's a horrible punishment because your soul in this life craves an intense connection to God, and it will never happen. It follows that if a person has deliberately and regularly chosen physical delights, has despised the truth and loved falsehood, he will be cut off from the fact, from that high level of being and remain disconnected matter. Right? If you torture your soul, how can you expect it to continue to live? Okay, so now that's kind of where he's at, and now finally he's going to explain these various elements in rabbinic thinking. Let me explain the meaning of the promises of good and the threats of evil punishment which are contained in the Torah. If you do the commandments, I will help you in your efforts to do them and to achieve perfection in them, and I will remove all obstacles and difficulties that stand in your way. However, you must understand that the ultimate reward for doing commandments of the Torah is not in any of these things themselves. If one violates the commandments of the Torah, punishments ensue. All kinds of hindrances will come into being. Okay, here's what he says. The Garden of Eden, Gan Eden. Yeah, Maimonides says, yeah, there is a Garden of Eden. It's a real place in this physical world. It's a fertile place containing the choicest of Earth's resources, numerous rivers, fruit-bearing trees, and God will show it to us in some future time, right? So I like to say that if Maimonides had known about Bali, or name your paradise, tropical paradise, right? If he had known about that place, he would have said, that's Gan Eden, right? Just nothing supernatural, just a natural place of lush, verdant forests and nature. None of this is impossible or improbable, right? It's quite likely that there is such a place. Gehenna, the fiery brimstone hell. That's the name for the pain and punishment which will come to the wicked. Now, here's what he says about this. Pay close attention. No specific description of this punishment is contained in the Talmud. One teacher says the sun will come so close that the wicked will burn. Others say that a strange heat will be produced from within their own bodies to incinerate them. So he's trying to placate here those who believe in fire and brimstone. And he gives support text, proof text to support each view. But what does Maimonides say is the punishment? He says Gehenna is the name for the punishment. There's nothing in the Torah. Some people say this, others say that. What does Maimonides say? Right? And here he's played a trick on the average reader, who just kind of said, okay, so there's some kind of fire and brimstone punishment. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying some people believe that, but he doesn't believe that, right? What he said was the ultimate punishment is your soul is cut off, period. There's no fire and brimstone about it. You just cease to exist. He already said that up here, but he doesn't want to say that over here because that would upset people who want to believe in fire and brimstone. At least that's how I read this. And now we come to resurrection of the dead. It is one of the cardinal principles established by Moses, our teacher, right? Remember, he's commenting on the Mishnah, which says, you have to believe in resurrection of the dead. So he can't very well say it's not real, it's not Jewish. It's there, it's in the text, it's in the Mishnah. Yes, it's a cardinal principle of Moses, our teacher. A person who does not believe in this principle has no real religion, certainly not Judaism. All men, right? However, resurrection is only for the righteous, blah, 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 blah. But then he ends, all men must die and their bodies decompose. Well, if your body decomposes, where's the resurrection? He has, again, I think, clouded the issue here, and intentionally so, because the Mishnah said you have to believe in resurrection of the dead. And he says, yeah, he doesn't explain any of the problems with resurrection, and none of the problems which he didn't mention about as resurrection. And I'm sure he's smart enough to have figured out the questions that I asked earlier in this class, but he doesn't even ask those questions nor try to answer them, because I believe he doesn't believe in resurrection of the dead. And this has been a raging debate among Maimonides scholars since he wrote this, even during his lifetime, that whether he believed in resurrection of the dead or not. I'm of the group of people who says he did not believe in it because it doesn't make sense. But plenty of people say, no, he really did believe it. He wrote a whole essay after this saying, yes, I really do believe it. But it doesn't fit with the rest of his worldview. Why would you want to go to that spiritual afterlife that your soul craves? And if you don't want physical delights anymore, why would you want to come back to a physical world to be resurrected? Just doesn't make sense. And so I think he intentionally left it vague here. And what he meant over here to himself, he was thinking to himself, Tchiyat HaMetim means giving life to the dead. It doesn't have to mean resurrection of the dead. That is what the rabbis meant when they used that term. But I think he meant Olam Haba, the spiritual afterlife. You have to believe in a spiritual afterlife. And he did believe in that. Okay, then the days of the Messiah. Okay, remember that he had two versions of the Messianic era. One was natural and one was supernatural. Here he is going to describe in some detail a natural Messianic era, not a supernatural one. We're not going to live forever. Bread is not going to grow on trees. Clothes aren't going to grow on trees. There's not going to be the open Walmart that's free for everybody. It's just going to be a nice place to live in the world, unlike the coronavirus era we live in now. So what are the days of Messiah? Well, it refers to a time when sovereignty will revert to Israel. Check, got that, right? By the way, we can check with modern times. Maimonides didn't live in our day, but we live in our day, and there is sovereignty in Israel. Jewish people will return to the land of Israel. Now almost a majority of Jews in the world do live in Israel. Maybe more will end up going there. The king, well, we don't have kings anymore, so we have prime ministers now, will be a very great one with his royal palace in Zion. Okay, so the prime minister does live in Israel, but his name and his reputation will extend throughout the world, in even greater measure than that of King Solomon. Of course, with the internet and international news and television and so on, radio, that can definitely happen. All nations will make peace with him. Well, that we certainly don't have. and all countries will serve him out of respect for his great righteousness and the wonders which will occur through him. Well, that certainly isn't the case. I don't know about serving him, but at least we'll all be living together side by side. All those who rise against him will be destroyed, right? By the way, just for the record, I do not for a second believe that Netanyahu is the Messiah, even though he's the Prime Minister of Israel. We have not reached this Messianic era. But I would say that given his, he's going to have a few more things to do with the Messiah on the next column. But once we're at world peace, and we have that peace dividend, and people are working on cures for all kinds of diseases like coronavirus, and world poverty has been eradicated, so everybody has food to eat, then all the signs of the Messiah coming will have been met, and hopefully the Prime Minister of Israel at that time will be respected for his wisdom, and that would make him, by definition here, the Messiah, although maybe not the son of David. Okay, here he's going to make it clear this is not a supernatural Messianic era. Except for the fact that sovereignty will revert to Israel, nothing will be essentially different from what it is now. There will still be rich and poor, strong and weak, but a minimum of labor will produce great benefits. Imagine how easy it is for us to make bread or to buy bread in the store. It's less than 1 hour's labor. Well, at minimum wage gives you enough money to buy a loaf of bread compared to what it was in Maimonides' day. So minimum labor will produce great benefits. That is what the sages meant when they said in the future, the land of Israel will bring forth bread, ready baked rolls, and fine woolen garments. Not literally, but figuratively. It'll be easy to obtain these items. They will be inexpensive, relatively inexpensive, because of the peace dividend we'll all enjoy and modern technology. This is rather like what people say when someone finds things ready for use. They say so-and-so has found his bread already baked and his meal already cooked, right? And you can get ready-baked bread and ready-cooked meals to eat from the supermarket today. Now he's going to add a few more elements to the Messianic era here. The great benefits are released from oppression by other kingdoms, right? So Israel will be fully independent. Widespread increase of wisdom, end of wars, perfection will be widespread, with the result that people will merit the life of the world to come. Everybody will, because everybody will become enlightened. But the Messiah will die. It's not going to be supernatural. However, his reign will be a very long one. All of human life will be longer. For when worries and troubles are removed, people live longer, right? We're going to have when you don't have to worry and you don't die of starvation or hunger or diseases which we can find cures for, right? People will just naturally live longer. They will eventually die anyway, but we'll have longer, healthier, more enjoyable lives, and that will be the world, right? That's the Messianic era. We do not long and hope for the days of Messiah because of an increase in productivity and wealth. Yeah, don't imagine that you're going to hope for the days because life will be easy and you'll be wealthy. Or you'll ride horses and drink wine to the accompaniment of a song, as some confused people think, but rather because we'll then have an opportunity to gather together in fellowship, and goodness and wisdom will prevail. That's why you should hope for the days of the Messiah. And because righteousness and abundant justice in the Messianic King, right? And they also anticipate the performance of all the commandments of the Torah will with neither inertia on the one hand or compulsion on the other, right? We'll be doing the commandments because we'll realize the value of the commandments. That's his Messianic era, a very natural time. What is the world to come, Olam Haba? That is the ultimate reward which we are devoted, right? That's the spiritual afterlife, and that's what is meant by all Jews have a share in the world to come. Nevertheless, even though that is the end we seek, he who wishes to serve God out of love should not serve him to attain the world to come. He should rather believe that wisdom exists, that this wisdom is the Torah, that the Torah was given by the prophets, and that the Torah, he taught us virtues that are commandments and vices which are sins, and a decent person must cultivate the virtues and avoid the sins, and in so doing he will perfect the specifically human, or soul, that is, which resides within him, and will be genuinely different from the animals. One who becomes fully human, he acquires the nature of the perfect human being. There's no external power to deny his soul eternal life, and his soul thus attains eternal life it has come to know, which is the world to come, as we have explained. Okay. And then he goes on with his 13 principles of faith, which I'll kind of skip over for now. I just want to go to the last few. The 11th fundamental principle is God rewards those who perform the commandments and punishes those who transgress its admonitions. The greatest reward is the world to come. The worst punishment is extinction, right? He reiterates that idea. That's the reward and punishment. The next one is the Messianic Era. We should wait for him, even though he is taking a long time to get here, but we shouldn't count on him coming at any particular time. And finally, resurrection of the dead, which we've already explained. No, he hasn't. He never explained resurrection of the dead. He intentionally never explained it because I think he didn't believe it. And here's Yigdal. Okay, so that's the text. I know I went kind of quickly through the whole thing. So questions? Yes, Ronnie. You have to unmute yourself first. Can you unmute? Unmute.
Yeah. Once we achieve this Messianic age, is it forever?
Yes. No. The Messianic Era. Well, the Messianic Era will be forever, but we will die. And
for the next million years, human beings will be living in God Eden.
Yeah. I think that's the idea, right? That look, he seems to have this. It's a good question. I think he has this idea that that human beings will continue to advance in a positive progression. We might say 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Right now, we're in the kind of 1 step back period, in my opinion. But but we'll eventually evolve into a better and better civilization until eventually we kind of reach close to the goal, and then the Messiah will take us the next step forward into the ultimate Messianic era. That's what I would say. But and that'll last forever as long as we continue to behave. But that's only a this world thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, we got the handout. So yeah, so if you're interested more in Maimonides, again, I recommend the book by, I'm going to type the name in here, Micah, here to everybody, everyone. Okay, Micah Goodman, Maimonides book, and Kenneth Seeskin on Guide for the Perplexed. Okay, those are the 2 books I recommend if you want to, instead of reading the Guide for the Perplexed, which is really kind of esoteric and takes a lot of work, those 2 books are short, relatively short, and kind of straightforward explanations of Maimonides' belief. As those 2 people interpreted it, right? There is, as I mentioned, kind of a raging dispute about whether Maimonides believed in resurrection. I'm sure each of those people takes explains their view. Any other questions? Okay, we actually kind of got through the whole thing. That's Maimonides, the introduction to his 13 beliefs. We sing Yigdal, which is sort of a musical version of them. But I think it's much more interesting to read the essay that leads up to them. You get a kind of a flavor for his pungent writing and some of his ideas. Okay, so if there's no more questions, I guess that's it for Unorthodox Jewish Beliefs. So,
It's been great. It's been great. I've learned so much.
Yes, it's been wonderful, Rabbi Morgen. Thank you so much.
Rabbi Morgen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful.
It's been wonderful. What are you going to do in the fall?
Well, I'm definitely going to go back to doing the Invitation to Judaism class again, and then I don't know. I might go back. I don't know. You know what? Write me and tell me what you want to hear.
I was going to say, we take requests, so why not?
Right, yeah, definitely. Yeah, let's just send me whatever your questions are. Okay, thank you all for joining us, and until next time, have a great summer. Hope you all have a good July 4th, and we'll see you all soon online.
Thank you, Rabbi Morgan.
Thank you, Rabbi Morgan.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Jennifer.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank
Yes,
you.
definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. להתראות בספטמבר.
Yeah, להתראות.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.